Because of the scope we provide to the company, the consensus is when we are down, the entire company is down. And when we're down, the company is losing 6 figures a minute. So the onus is on us to keep up. And if we do go down, get back up quickly. A little disclaimer about this talk that I've been asked to put in. Breaking prod and getting away with it refers to getting a thumbs up from your boss because you found a hole in a run book, rather than getting away with it by being on the next plane to the Cayman Islands before anyone realises what you've done. So, definition time. Chaos engineering is the discipline of experimenting on a distributed system in order to build confidence in the system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production. That's from principlesofchaos.org, which is a very, very good resource. It basically talks about chaos engineering being about building a hypothesis based on a stable system, running your experiments in production, and then using the output to minimise blast radius should a real incident occur that takes out part of your system. A very famous example of a company that does chaos engineering is Netflix. I won't cover too much of this because there are people in the audience from Netflix and I don't want to get anything wrong. So a few of the tools that they use, the one many of you may have heard of is called Chaos Monkey. This is an application that basically runs in the background, killing off services and checking that things still work with these services dead. They also have something called Chaos Kong, which refers to the way that they kill off entire AWS regions to check that their services can handle massive scale outages like that. More recently, they have had a blog post about a tool they've created called CHAP, which is Chaos Automation Platform. CHAP basically spins up a chaotic and a control cluster of servers, routes a little bit of traffic to each of them, does some metrics, gathering and outputs all that for them to review. Secondly, another company that does a lot of chaos engineering and disaster recovery training and testing is Google. I was going to bit.ly that link, but you can click it if you want. This is an article by Kripa Krishnan. She, at the time of writing this, was leading the disaster recovery testing program at Google. The article is called Weathering the Unexpected. The article basically goes over the fact that companies need to accept system and process failures as a means of learning rather than something to jump on an engineer or a process for. And it also brings into question whether the value of what you gain out of doing chaos engineering and disaster recovery testing will justify the cost of that testing. Something really good about this article, it features a transcript of a kind of an example of a disaster recovery test. So the engineer who is on call gets a call from a tester, walk them through a disaster scenario, simulates doing some stuff to bring back service, and there's, like I say, there's a transcript of that which is really useful. So that's just an example of two companies that do this type of work, but why is it important? So this is chaos. In Bank Holiday weekend, May 2017, British Airways had a massive computer outage which grounded lots of flights, affected tens of thousands of customers. The follow-on from the incident review was that the outage was created by a single contractor, service died, didn't come back up, and the failover to their secondary data centre didn't go very smoothly. So having major systems fail and failing over to your secondary DC is never a situation that you want to be in. However, the principles of this chaos engineering and disaster recovery testing is that you want to be in a position that should you need to fail over, you've tested it, you know your processes work, you know your systems work, and you can do it without too much of an issue. So just a quick show of hands, this is the only audience participation, I promise. Is there anyone here that is doing any kind of chaos engineering or disaster recovery testing in their business currently? Intentionally or not? So this is Core Tribe's logo. In Core, we tend to go more towards the Google way of doing things, which is these human simulated failures rather than Netflix's way of doing it automated. And we refer to them internally as fire drills. Our intention is to make these as incident-like as possible, so that if it really did happen, we'd know how to respond to it. So in these fire drills, there are a few things that I'll talk about how we do them. So first off, we have the preamble, which is a meeting involving everyone that's going to take part in this fire drill, and this is before the fire drill takes place. And in it, we cover a few things to give some context around the pretend incident. So for us, very important things is day of the week, the time of day, and any events, sporting events that are on now or starting soon. So for us, this really matters. We would deal with an incident a lot differently if some of our payments providers went down in the middle of the night versus if they did it midday on a Saturday when everyone is wanting to put bets on for football. We also cover off the environment in which we're going to do the fire drill, so whether this be our staging or production disaster recovery environments, just so everyone's working on the same kit. And finally, the Slack channel in which we are doing our communication. So as I mentioned, we try and make these as incident-like as possible. At Sky Betting and Gaming, we use Slack as our primary method of communication within the business. We have a number of general channels, but one of the first things that we do when an incident arises is we create a Slack channel specifically for that incident so that all communication can be held within there. That helps us two ways. Firstly, it allows other general channels to not be inundated with crosstalk if there are two incidents at the same time, for example. All communication is kept to a single channel. And secondly, it gives us an automatic, no effort needed, chronological breakdown of what happened when in the incident. So who is involved in these fire drills? First off is someone who's given themselves this title of orchestrator. It's their job to break the thing, and then they play the role of any third parties or the service desk primarily, who would be the ones to contact the on-call engineers if there was an incident. Secondly, there will be a platform engineer and one or two developers that are on call, depending on the scope and the remit of the fire drill. Thirdly, we'll have an incident commander, or IC. It's their job to kind of manage the incident and manage the engineers and get them doing the right thing so that the engineers can just focus on fixing the problem. Most of the time, we also have service level analysts or managers, and they will be aware of the service risks, the priorities, and the business impact of services being unavailable. They will act as kind of the go-between for stakeholders in the business that are following the Slack channel and the engineers and the IC. And they translate the tech speak into business updates that go out to key stakeholders. And finally, depending on the, like I say, the scope and remit of the fire drill, we'll have some third parties. These may be played by the orchestrator, or they may be actual third parties. So this can include other tribes, like our colleagues in the betting tribe or gaming tribe. It can also include service providers, such as our payment providers, or just angry directors that want an update on an incident. So after the preamble, we all go back to our desks, full of context, waiting to get paged. Now, I'll just go over a few of the scenarios that we have had as part of these fire drills. So first off, we've had clusters, nodes from clusters failing. Can you get back on? Can you start them up? What happens to the applications while they're down? Pretty bread and butter stuff. Secondly, things like how does latency and, well, network latency and latency on the box due to not enough resource, CPU resource, how does that affect our apps? Can we queue things up? How high do queues get before we start seeing issues? That sort of thing. Moving on to the more interesting things, blade failure. Not surprised using Blade Center as old as that. But this is where X number of random servers get turned off, and you have to then use your knowledge of the systems, your knowledge of the business, and work out what is more important to get back on and where. And this is where it goes from being just a technical, turn the servers back on, to a process. What are the most important things to our business? What do we need to get back into service quicker? You may have seen this talk. If you haven't, I would recommend you do. This is a talk by Tom Scott, which is called A Single Point of Failure, and it's about the fictional scenario when Google stopped checking for passwords before logging in. Spoiler alert, it's because of a malicious code deploy. We have had scenarios in the past, fire drill scenarios, not real scenarios, where the test has been a malicious or botched code deploy that has broken stuff. So we have the process in place of properly rolling back releases and identifying timelines leading up to the release. And then on to the more interesting ones. If your office is underwater, can you still operate? Now, ISO 9001, everyone's favourite, says we've got a procedure that tells us exactly what to do when our office is underwater or unavailable. That's great. That's what you're supposed to do, but what actually happens if you can't get to your office? So in December, just gone, we had a mandatory work from home day where it was quite enjoyable. Mandatory work from home day where no one was allowed in the office and you had to do all your work over the VPN. This highlighted issues with capacity problems on the VPN and access problems on the VPN, but it's better to do it when you can still get to the office if you need to, rather than finding out you can't access critical infrastructure in the middle of an incident. And finally, my favourite one. You have 15 minutes until zombies take over your primary data centre. This is a real scenario from the top. So this is not just about core, this is an entire cross-tribe, company-wide collaboration effort. The intent of these disaster recovery testing scenarios is to make sure that any on-call engineer, no matter how junior or senior, is able to do a failover from primary to secondary data centre. Now, being honest, in a real disaster recovery scenario where we are going to lose a data centre, the single new on-call engineer is not going to be on their own. Everyone is going to jump on. But the purpose of this disaster recovery is that you don't want to have reliance on individuals or knowledge that is stored in people's heads. It must be written down so that anyone can follow it. So there have been many, many iterations of this failover scenario. It is usually zombies. And different engineers have been involved from different tribes in every single one. There have been updates to our runbooks on it every single time, and it has resulted in what is a very good, polished process of what to do should zombies attack. This comes back to what I mentioned about the article that Kripakrishnan from Google wrote about whether the cost outweighs the value. So having the entire company or the entire technology section of the company working on something that isn't really an incident, it's just pretend, is a big cost to the company. However, the value of being able to fail over quickly is much higher than the cost. And thankfully, after all these tests, we can say with confidence that we get back to a stable and safe position well within the time mandated by regulators and business stakeholders. So, as we've been running these for the last quite a few months, what have we learned to pass on to any companies that may be thinking about doing something similar? Oh, sorry, Mr. Part. As I mentioned, these are as incident-like as possible, and after every incident we have a retrospective, and so after every fire drill we have a retrospective. This is pretty bread and butter, post-its and pens, bread and butter for an agile company anyway. Post-its and pens, what went well, what didn't go well, and actions for the next time. Stick them on the wall and discuss. So yeah, what can we learn? It's not easy when you're regulated. So If Netflix wanted to just serve content over at 480p, they would take a business hit and they'd have angry customers. But as far as I'm aware, they wouldn't be chased by regulators. If we take down our responsible gambling tools, or if we intentionally block withdrawals for customers, we're in a lot of trouble with the regulator. Secondly, it's not always about just fixing the incident. So in a specific fire drill I was in, we had HTTPD stopped on a number of servers, and every time I ran a batch job to start it up, it's shut back down again. Nothing in the logs to suggest why, but it was just stopping. After a furious 5 minutes, it turns out it was the orchestrator shutting it down. And he was doing this because he wanted the scope of the fire drill to not be, how quickly can this engineer start HTTPD? He wanted the scenario to be, how quickly can this response team identify a problem, walk through the strategy for bannering the site so that customers don't get a bad experience if we're broken, and then start HTTPD back up. It's not always planned. So, despite our agile nature and the value that the business sees in doing these tests, it's currently very hard to get a full app bounce signed off in the middle of the day. Unless you're me and you run the wrong automated job and bounce all the apps in the middle of the day. Now this again is linked into the article from Google. Failures in process should be seen as a learning exercise rather than something to jump on an engineer for. So I didn't get a, what on earth have you done, why have you done this? I got a, how did you manage this? So changes were made to processes, we made it so this automated job to reboot, or to restart all the apps wasn't available to run in prod. Good start. So what do we want to do in the future? The first thing we want to do is we want to automate more. So currently we rely on the orchestrator to be thinking up these scenarios and planning them and setting them in motion. We want to get some automation in place similar to what Netflix has that can break stuff so that even the person playing the role of the service desk doesn't know what's actually broken because that's more realistic. We also need to make more diverse scenarios and the automation will play into this. So the majority of the on-call team have gone through the majority of the scenarios that we've so far laid out. And it'll only be so long before they get bored and the purpose of the drill is no longer valid. If you know exactly what is happening, then you're not following the process of an incident, you're following the process of what you did last time this fire drill happened. And finally, we really want to break live. So in order to do this, we need to be running active-active out of multiple data centers and have full sign-off from the business, but we are pushing for that and it is something that we will be doing soon. If you enjoyed that and want to talk to me more about it, I'm at Muggerty on Twitter and GitHub and a lot of other things that I couldn't remember. Any questions?
If there are any questions, if you could state your name and your affiliation beforehand, that would be great. Are there any questions for Oliver? I thought it was there's one over there. Brilliant.
Oh, Ray Bellis, I see. What do you do when Slack goes down?
Unfortunately, it's Skype for Business. Skype for Business. But we do have plans in place for that as well.
Are there any other questions? One at the front here, please. Maybe it'll be easier if I just pass my microphone over, actually. Here we go.
Yeah, Mitchell Southgate, Ghost Services. So after a disaster, is there a debrief time that's actually management actually listen and reflect back on the procedure instead of a point of blaming? Is it like a learning curve there, or?
Yeah, so the amount of money that has been put into running these tests specifically the company-wide ones, there is a full debrief that gets passed up the chain to management, and it'd be silly not to have that sort of thing, especially the amount of resource that's been put into it. But yeah, that does happen. They're not fruitful. They're fruitless. They are fruitful.
Anybody else? Over there, please.
Hiya, Tim Dorr from Game. We've run situations like this in the past, but I was just checking when you guys run these sort of situations, we've had it before where people have gone, oh, is this a test? And then they're kind of like not taking it seriously. Do you get over that, just as in people, with training with people about how you say, like, don't necessarily take it as a real thing or really as a test, because just so that people actually take it potentially seriously and you actually run the scenario in a more realistic way?
I guess it's based on the maturity, I guess, of the people doing the test, or the people being involved in the test. So they know that it's not real because we've told them in 5 minutes' time something will break and you will have to deal with it. But it's the same as like an actual real fire drill. Just because it's a test doesn't mean that you should treat it any differently to a real fire. And it's just about the maturity of the people involved and getting them on side.
I'm being told that's about all the time we have for questions. So if you'd please join me in thanking Oliver for a fascinating talk about the maturity of an organisation. Thank you.